Hi everyone, welcome to this analysis. I hope all of you are able to see me and hear me clearly. So I'll just quickly check on YouTube if everything is fine, and then we'll get started with the session. Okay. All right. So I'm back after taking CUET PG 25, and I'm specifically going to talk about the COQP 12, that is the question paper with the code COQP 12, which is for general management, right? So this analysis is not about any of the other question papers. I'm specifically going to talk about only this particular paper, which is related to general management. So the paper was conducted today from 4 to 5:30 p.m. The overall conduct of the test went pretty smooth. Didn't really see any issue happening. At the center where I was in Mumbai, there were a couple of people who had to sort of change their system and all in the beginning. Fortunately or unfortunately, I had reached very early, so I had reached almost an hour in advance, and due to which I had to sit in front of my machine for a very long time. One thing which was very different compared to last year's CUET PG, right, was the low interest, I think, in the test, because TIS has decided not to take CUET PG for some of the main courses that they have, right? So if you look at the MA HRM LR program, which was earlier through CUET PG, as until last year, that because it went out and they started accepting CAT for it, I think the overall interest around CUET PG dropped because of that. And when I entered the test venue, I didn't see a lot of people. Though, of course, once I reached the lab, I saw that the entire lab was pretty much full. So pretty sizable number there, but otherwise I think the overall interest was on the lower side. So didn't really see too many people, unlike last year, where I think they maybe double or triple the number, right? So if I were to just make an estimate as to how many people I saw at the venue last year versus this year. So because even after the test got over, I got to see that there weren't many people who were coming outside the test venue, right? So it was a fairly small number, maybe somewhere close to about 300, 400 students at the center where I was. But last year, definitely it was far, far more. So let's talk about the analysis of the test. And one major change that happened this year, right? And I'm sure people who have taken the test, obviously, you were aware and you were preparing for the test, so you know it. But they had reduced the time duration. So there was no sectional breakup. But the entire 75 questions appeared in a jumbled manner. So at the beginning of the test, you were given a choice whether you want to attempt the paper in English or Hindi, and there were two separate papers for that. So the question paper was not the same. You have to decide in the beginning which paper you want to attempt. And so at the top, there were two tabs, English and Hindi, and you could have chosen to attempt it in Hindi as well. So I chose the English paper, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. So there were 75 questions, as they had mentioned in the brochure as well. No change on that front. Each question gives you 4 marks if you get it right. There's a -1 if you get it wrong. And the overall LOD of the test, which is the level of difficulty, was very similar to last year. So there was no major change in the absolute level of questions. So LOD of the test was easy, but because the test duration was 90 minutes, unlike the previous year where it was 105 minutes, so 105 minutes for 75 questions was a little too much. And that is why a lot of people found it to be very, very easy last year. The topper score was 295, right? The highest score, which was there last year. So I don't see that. Maybe, of course, the topper will still go to somewhere close to maybe a 290 or so in this paper, because it wasn't very, very difficult as a test. But because the duration went from 105 minutes to 90 minutes, of course, it has its implications. You have 15 minutes less compared to what you had last year. So definitely that put slightly more pressure, right? And the reduced test duration made it, I would say, a slightly challenging test, right? So I when I started the paper, of course, there were a lot of easy questions in the beginning. I saw a lot of VRC questions in the beginning. There was no RC, there was only VA. So let's talk about the details, right? But then when I started the paper, a lot of easy questions in the beginning, but somewhere towards the in the middle section of it, quite a few questions wherein you had to calculate a lot, especially the DI part of it. So let's talk about the individual areas and how many questions appeared from each of the areas. As I mentioned, there was no sectional breakup that was there, right? So the entire all 75 questions appeared one after the other, no sectional breakup whatsoever. QA so in the quant side of things, which is pure quant mathematics questions, there were 15 questions which I counted. And in DI, I counted 14 questions. Now, this is including the two questions on Venn diagram which appeared. So there was a football and hockey. I think there was a set on that. There were two questions on it. And so these two questions appeared back to back, right? So there, in DI, there were 14 questions that I counted, which is coming from seven sets of two questions each. So generally, you don't see that, right? So you don't see two questions on a set. But for whatever reasons, they had created seven sets. Each of these sets was arithmetic based, which is basically application of percentages and ratios, right? So there was nothing too complicated about it, but you have to, of course, calculate, right? So, for example, there was a set on the number of questions from individual areas of math in a particular test, right? And they had, for some reason, they had asked, they had written name of the test as CAT and not, they could have simply asked something else, but they thought, okay, let's ask CAT. And that too, the number of questions was like 100 and 50 and so on and so forth, right? But two separate shifts, so shift one and shift two, area-wise number of questions, right? So simple line chart which was there, and you had to answer two questions based on it. Then there was one on above poverty line, below poverty line, and then within that the percentage of males and females, right? The proportion of males and females. A lot of calculations, right, which are involved. So there was another on production of some metal, and then the for a particular year the breakup is given to you. Then there was another Venn diagram which was on the types of food, right? So some Bengali sweets and Gujarati sweets and things like that. Again, not too difficult, but then you have to calculate a lot. So QA 15 questions standalone is what I counted. DI seven sets of two questions each is what I counted, right? Then in logical reasoning, I counted 24 questions. So I've also included critical reasoning as part of logical reasoning. As we progress, we'll talk about the more specifics, right? And then finally, language skills, I counted total of 22 questions, right? So 29 in QADI, 24 in logical reasoning, and then 22 in language skills, together making 75 questions, 4 marks per question. So 300 is the maximum marks. And across the board, the level of difficulty was easy, right? So now let's talk about the individual areas. Now, regarding QADI, right? And those of you who joined in the YouTube chat, you can mention how many questions you attempted and things like that. If there were any questions that you found interesting or difficult, and so on and so forth, right? So, the entire QA, right, was arithmetic, right? They don't ask any other area. So there was nothing from permutation combination, nothing from probability, nothing on geometry and mensuration, nothing from algebra, right? Pure arithmetic. So if you know your arithmetic well, you could have easily attempted most of the questions. But because in some questions, it may happen that you are familiar with the concept or not, basis that you could have found maybe some of the questions slightly tricky. For example, there are some questions where it said that, so say 150% more, right? Now, when you say 150% more, somebody might in a hurry end up calculating, let's say, into 1.5, right? Or they may forget that it is 150% more than something, right? It's not 150% of something. So there was a scope to make a few mistakes in this process as you're going fast because you want to attempt more questions. There's always a chance that you will end up making a few mistakes. But otherwise, pretty straightforward. Most of the questions were from the topics that I've listed. I don't think I missed anything, but I remember one or two questions from percentages. There a couple of questions from profit loss discount. A lot of questions on time and work, right? So questions such as 4 men and 6 women can do it in so many days and things like that, or 4 men and 6 women are paid so much for the work that they do in so many days, etc. And then splitting, right? So again, there was a scope to make a few mistakes, right? Then coming to time speed distance, right? So time speed distance also there were questions. So relative motion, right? So there was one nice question that there is a car which is behind a bus by some 90 kilometers or so, and after 3 hours it goes ahead by 60 kilometers or so. So find the speed of the car or something like that. Then partnerships, again, very easy question on partnership. I think there was only one question. And then simple interest, compound interest. I think there were one or two questions. One of them had slight bit of calculations involved. So some amount of money invested at 12% interest for on CI for 2 years gives the same interest when that money plus 3,000 is invested at 2 years on SI. So then find the sum which is invested, right? So again, if you know the formula, you should be able to calculate, right? But you have to persist in some cases to actually get to the right answer. As I was saying, the challenging part, of course, was the data interpretation side of things. because in DI, right, 7 sets of 2 questions. So you're basically making a lot of computations, but just for two questions every time. But it wasn't something where the information was missing and you have to calculate a lot of things and then finally come to the answer. Everything was direct. So one could have said, okay, fine, this is the set. Maybe I'm able to do one question on it, but the second question I'm not able to solve, right? So that could have been done, though there were very few instances where you would have had to resort to that. But otherwise, most of it was doable. If somebody is good at math, good at arithmetic, I think you would have done most of the questions out of 20. I think sorry for some mistake that has happened there. I think it should be 15 and 14. My bad. The number of questions there should be 15 and 14. Okay, so sorry for the typo that you see there. So 15 in quant, 15 in arithmetic rather, and then 14 questions of DI, making a total of 29 questions. I think a good candidate could have attempted somewhere close to 24, 25 or more out of these 29 questions if you are a well-prepared candidate on arithmetic, right? If you had left a few topics, let's say if you had left time, speed, distance, or time and work, etc., maybe you can deduct a few more questions. But otherwise, out of 29, I would say 24, 25 is a very, very good attempt in this area. Now let's move to LR. I can see in chat, Jeevan has written, I attempted 72 with 100% accuracy. That's very good, Jeevan. Congratulations to you. I hope once the paper gets released, you are able to check everything and that 100% accuracy works for you. I think that's a solid attempt if you attempted 72 questions. Moving on to the LR section. So in LR, non-verbal reasoning, which is you have LR caselets, coding, decoding. So it was a complete mixed bag, right? You had 2, 3 questions from each of the areas. So there was one LR caselet on 4 people traveling to 4 cities and some 4 venues and 4 companies. I think they were shortlisted or for interviews or something like that. Extremely doable set, nothing too complicated on it. Then coding, decoding, maybe a few questions could have been challenging for some people, but otherwise nothing out of the world. So the logic that I came across was mostly something that you have seen in some other questions in the past in your practice exercise or class exercise or in some other test, right? So even for example, for series based questions or coding, decoding, if you just know the positions of the letters in the alphabet, you would have got the logic in most of the cases. Okay. Then direction. So there were, I think, 2 questions on directions. One was extremely easy. The other one where you had to calculate using Pythagoras theorem, but again, not difficult. Blood relation, there was one simple question based on it. Number series, again, as I said, similar to coding, decoding, fairly doable. Symbol-based conclusion is where sometimes people end up making mistakes because you have to look at the symbols. There are three symbols. So A hash B means A is less than equal to B, right? A at B means A equal to B. So that kind of a thing. So 3 symbols given and then 4 to 5 statements given based on it, and then 2 conclusions. So you have to say whether the first one follows or the second one follows or both follows or neither follows and so on. And there was a question on visual reasoning as well, right? So that visual reasoning question I just randomly marked. I mean, there's nothing much to do. So I just thought, okay, let me just mark something randomly and see what happens. Because I could not really figure out the exact logic. I sort of counted, okay, how many edges were there and so on and so forth. But nothing really was fitting in. So I just randomly marked something. Anyway, I assume a lot of people should have, I think a lot of people should have stayed away from that one question because it wasn't making a lot of sense. Then verbal reasoning, so cause and effect, syllogisms, and implicit assumption. I think 1 question each is what I counted. I may be off by maybe 1 question here and there, but 3 questions for sure I remember because there's one cause and effect question, one syllogisms, and one on implicit assumption. So 3 for sure. It could be 4 as well. So the split could be 24 or 21 and 3, right? So total 24 questions. I think a well-prepared candidate, barring a few questions here and there, could have attempted at least 20. So you're somebody who has decently prepared for the test. I think 19, 20 questions you could have attempted, right, in this paper. And then comes the last area, so to say, which is the language skills. And in language skills, again, there was no RC, right? So I was expecting at least one RC, but there was no RC. So most of the questions were sentence correction grammar based. So I think six to 7 questions or maybe even more. I think 6 on sentence correction grammar, roughly somewhere around that. And if I consider the synonyms, antonyms, idioms, fill in the blanks with suitable words. That's, I think, about 9 or 10 questions there, at least a 9 or 10 question. So together, combined, all of this would be somewhere around 19. I have not written the exact number because I don't know how many questions of grammar were there, but it was heavy on sentence correction, grammar, synonym, antonym, idioms, and fill in the blanks. Then other areas that were tested. So paragraph completion, there were 2 questions, and these were nice paragraph completions. I'm not saying they were difficult, not even moderate, but easy to moderate, where you had to really read the passage to understand. The passage was not long, right? Just about 4 or 5 lines, but it has nice connection to the last line. So every time you had to figure out what was the last line of that paragraph. But if you read the para carefully, you would get the answer, right? So it was a very nicely done thing. Paragraph jumbles, so para jumbles. One question is what I remember. I don't know if there was more. I'm not able to recall. But one question for sure was there and wasn't very difficult to figure out. Okay, but somewhere it wasn't fitting in. I mean, the fit wasn't great, right? So it was maybe taken just randomly from the middle of some paragraph in some article somehow. So that is why it wasn't great as a question per se, but then fairly doable parajumble question. Now here is the catch, right? So if you're somebody who is great at verbal, right? Your English is fantastic in terms of grammar, vocab, and all. I think one could have easily done 20 questions out of 22. But people who do not have a great command on the language maybe could have struggled a little bit and would have gone to somewhere around 14, 15 attempts, right? Now, there is always a chance that you end up making a few silly mistakes here and there, right? So throughout the paper, there is always a possibility of that. And that will, of course, impact the final scores that you get. Now, overall, if I have to sort of summarize, right? So the discussion that we had so far, what I feel, and again, it's a very personal view, there's because they reduce the duration by 15 minutes, it is going to have an impact on the cutoffs. And the cutoffs will drop a little bit because of that. The other thing is, if you look at the last year's CUET PG, right, where they were accepting it for the HRMLR program, the ODCL program, a lot of aspirants were focusing on those courses, programs, and that is why there were more number of takers last year. So this year, the takers are also going to go down. A lot of these people who were planning for these courses have already applied through CAT. Some of them have got shortlisted on lot. So most of them will not apply to the CUET PG, the COQP12 that is there. So that is why there will be a drop in the cutoffs. How much it will drop, that's a very difficult thing to say because you never know. It's too early to talk about these things. Maybe if the paper once that is released, maybe we may have something that we can add, or once we have more reviews. Right now, I'm actually talking to you without talking to anybody else, right? I've not spoken to any of the students as well in terms of how the paper went and so on. It's just purely my view of the whole thing. So through CAT, the 3 programs I've already mentioned, and they are not going to be through COQP12 or the CUTPG that happened. So those are out of question. Uh, Last year's cutoff, if you see for MA in labor studies and practice, the cutoff was 265. Now, because of the reduction in time, this could go down to somewhere around 250 is what my gut feel is at this point of time. Similarly, MA MSc Analytics will also drop by maybe 15 marks or so, somewhere around 255 is what I consider. But that can further drop depending on the kind of aspirants who have taken the test, right? Because a lot of people who were aspiring for HRMLR, ODCL, etc., they're out of this entire candidate pool now. So that is why the cutoffs can even further drop a little bit, maybe a 245 for MSc Analytics or something like a 240 for labor studies and practice can also happen. Social entrepreneurship was 245 last year. That could be somewhere close to about 220 this year. MAMSC disaster management 195. But see, at the lower end, right? So as you go down on below 200, you're not going to see significant drops there. So disaster management could drop by say around 15 marks or so, right? Because people will still be able to get say 150 plus also. The rest of the programs, which is MA Education Technology, the Environment, Climate Change and Sustainability Studies, Disaster and Climate Risk Assessment, all of these were in the range of 120 to 160 last year, right? So they will stay more or less the same. So I don't think that is where the change is going to happen. At the top level, the cutoffs can go down a little bit, but at the middle level, the cutoffs are not going to drop too much, right? So I will say labor studies and practice, my current this thing would be somewhere around 240 to 245. MA/MSc Analytics could be somewhere around 245 to 250, right? Social Entrepreneurship somewhere around 220. Disaster Management remaining almost the same, maybe around 190 or so, or 180. Education Technology, others, etc., somewhere around 150, right? It could be 130, it could be 150 as well. But yeah, so not changing too much compared to last year, right? But at the top, yes, I think there will be a drop because of that reduction in time and the change in the candidate pool quality as well. Okay, so that's about it. I hope this has sort of given you an overview of what happened in COQP 12 this time. More or less similar to last year is what I would say. And the reduction in time definitely made it slightly more challenging, but it's a fun paper. It's a paper that makes you sort of realize that aptitude is not very, very difficult, right? But of course, once the cutoffs come out, people may have a different perception around it, right? So, but for now, I hope all of you had a decent attempt in the paper. You were able to do reasonably well. The wait is now for the final, the answer paper, the question paper, and the answer key. And once that is out, hopefully, we'll have slightly more clarity on what the probable cutoffs could be, right? So that's about it. All the best to all of you. I hope this interaction has helped you, and wish all of you all the best. Thanks for joining. In case there's anything, leave it as a comment and we'll be very happy to take your questions. Okay. So bye everyone. Thanks for joining and wish all of you all the best.